Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to YouTube Live. Today with me, I have Sean Dennis. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. How you doing, Sabor?
I'm well. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, very well, thank you.
We haven't met in a long time. How long has it been?
It has probably been, I would say, about a long time, about 5 years or 4 years, perhaps.
Wow. Wow.
I think before I moved country, I think you came to my leaving dinner.
Oh, right. Yes. You went to Qatar and stuff.
Yeah.
That was 2014? Was it 2014 or 2016?
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, around that time. 2015. In fact, 2015 I left. Yeah.
2015. Okay, good. So let me do a quick introduction for our viewers. So Sean, who is a convert to Islam, I asked him to come on to the live stream today. One of them is just general catch-up. Another one is that it's important to see through somebody's story the role that Muslims play in someone accepting Islam, right? And also it's a motivator for people that you may consider somebody and you may look at their background and assume that, oh, this person's never going to come to Islam because, you know, they're so different. And yet they will, you know, fit into the Muslim community, and you never know. There may be somebody like that in your neighborhood. There may be someone like that in your family. There may be someone like that that you interact with online. So just to get us all started, firstly, we met in 2014 or 2013. We met.
It was the I think it was the Olympic Dawah Day.
We met after the Olympic Dawah Day with Rudolph.
I went. Well, obviously you was at the retreat, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure.
Oh yes, definitely the retreat as well. And since Sean is somebody who not only has he accepted Islam, but pretty much from what I remember, he started taking dawah as soon as you know, he became Muslim. It just became part and parcel of who he is. So I've heard his story before, but I wanted it to be heard by everybody online. Hopefully, as a means that there may be perhaps somebody watching and they are non-Muslims who may be inspired to actually become Muslim. So, Sean, why don't you get started on your background and what made you interested in this topic?
Yeah, so in terms of my my background, so my father is Jamaican, but born in Britain, and my mother is English. So you could call me a Jafaican, I guess. But I was born in London and I was brought up in Brixton in South London, and pretty much lived all around the sort of South London area most of my childhood until I went to university and studied, which was in Brighton. At which point, obviously, I started to change as a person and started to develop as time went on. And I got to the end of my degree. So I was studying education, physical education, and I actually graduated as a PE teacher. And as a result of that, I got a teaching job in East London at a school in East Ham. And that was my first sort of exposure, I would say, to Islam and Muslims. And it turned out to be quite pivotal. At the time, I didn't realize. In terms of who I was sort of prior to Islam, I used to be heavily involved in music, which I think I've probably mentioned before. I used to do all sorts of things. I was an MC. I was a DJ. I used to promote at nightclubs. I used to do many things of that nature, and very heavily involved in music. To the point I actually released an album sort of later on in my time, like an EP, and sort of went through a number of different sort of phases in my life. And there was always sort of the back of my mind, I was someone that was always quite outgoing and always someone that was quite risk taking, I would say. and always quite an open book. And that's something that I would say that my mum's always instilled into me since a young boy. And, you know, I've never sort of, I didn't really grow up with religion as such. So my family, my dad's side are quite strong Christian, but my mum's side, I would say, are probably agnostic or atheist, some of them. So my dad passed away when I was 5 years old. So I actually lost contact with that side of my family for 20 years. So this sort of coincided with my journey to Islam as well, because I then got an address for my granddad 20 years later and decided to go and knock on the door to then find all of my dad's side of my family again and rekindle a relationship, and discovered a brother that I didn't realize knew about me, which was quite significant. And a number of things sort of happened in my life. But in terms of my exposure to Islam, that was in my school. So as I said before, I was a PE teacher, and that comes with its own culture. It's a bit of a laddish culture, I would say. And I had a number of Muslims that worked in my school, in terms of my colleagues that were around me, in terms of the students that were in my school. And I had a particular sort of change in my life, which revolved around an event that happened. So I actually went to party one evening, and I was sort of in a bit of a bad place in my life. And as a result of that evening, I got into quite a big sort of fracas at the time. And it sort of resulted in me being quite badly beaten up, which is quite, it was a real significant turning point in my life. And as a result of that, and being sort of around particular people and doing certain things that weren't necessarily good for me, it caused me to question, you know, what am I really doing here? And what is the purpose of my life? And I was living for the weekend. And so, you know, I would just earn my wages. I was a young bachelor living in London, and earning pretty decent money. And yeah, so I would live for the weekend, but then the weekend would come and then it would go back to Sunday again. And I had no sense of fulfillment in my life, I would say. I'd always been someone that was quite happy-go-lucky. So, you know, they talk about the tears of a clown. I always had a smile on my face, but actually inside, I always felt this sense of emptiness. So after this sort of particular period in my life, I got to a point where I was questioning my existence, and this coincided with a conversation I had with a colleague of mine, and she was actually a Muslim sister who was a teaching assistant in my school. And I never forget, I was teaching a lesson on the field, and this is probably not a good endorsement for my teaching, but I don't normally talk to people while I'm teaching. But the students were involved in a game. So I was talking to this teaching assistant, and I actually asked her a question about, why do you wear the hijab? And I was really ignorant at the time. And the only thing I sort of knew of Islam was pretty much what I saw in the media and saw in the news and whatever I was exposed to. So I questioned her about it, and she talked to me about the concept of modesty. And it just blew me away. It really did. And it was something that I'd never sort of thought about before. It was something that I hadn't really sort of pondered upon in terms of the importance of modesty. And I'm someone that I grew up, as I said, my dad passed away. So my mum, I had a little sister, and I was like the man of the house. So I was surrounded by women. So the concept of modesty always sort of resonated with myself. And that's something that I would have wanted for the females around me to feel a sense of modesty and so on. And, you know, my ignorance, I thought that she was oppressed by, you know, having to wear it and so on. And she sort of dispelled all of those misconceptions in our conversation. And that then sort of led into conversations around, you know, the purpose of life. Because I said, this is quite interesting. Where does this come from? And she talked about Islam and the purpose of life. And, you know, Sabor, I was always someone that believed in God. And I think I told you this before, but I always believed in a day of judgment. for me, it made total sense that this life, there must be accountability for the way we behave. So I always believed in a day of judgment, and I always believed in a creator, whether that was God or Allah, as we come to know. I didn't really know, but at the time, and ever since I grew up, I always believed in God, or you know, a creator as such. So when I heard about Islam, it triggered straight away, and it was something that really sort of was profound for me. As a result, she then she left the Quran in my office on my desk, and it was wrapped in cloth. And I remember going to the office one day, and as I said before, the laddish culture of the PE department, they were taking the mick a bit and saying, "Oh, look, you've got like the Book of Eli on your desk," you know. And it was quite sort of it was quite daunting at the time. And I remember walking into my office and my colleagues saying, "Oh, the Miss left a book on your desk." So I went to my desk and I opened it, and it was a Quran. And subhanallah, I remember that day, I was never more excited to go home from work, because I was so excited to read this book. And it was something that, you know, I had no clue, you know, what it was, what the information it had, and what I was potentially getting myself into. And it changed my life. It really did. As a result of that, you know what Muslims are like, Sabor. So as soon as someone starts to read about Islam, lots of my Muslim colleagues were approaching me, and you know, in their zealousness, may Allah bless them, they would give me books. And I remember walking from the car park to my office the next day, and I literally had a stack of books. They're like, "You must read this, you must read this." And my classroom, so I was a home tutor as well for a class, and my assistant was also a Muslim lady, and she gave me a book which was the Sira of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that was the thing that truly had the most profound effect on me. I remember reading it, and I used to get the tube home from work. So I used to go from Stepney Green, which is on the district line. I used to go to East Ham, and I would miss my stop and get off at Barking because I was so engrossed in this book. And one day after school, one of my colleagues called Nishan, he said, "Look, I'd like to catch up with you at some point." So one day after school, we went into a classroom, and we just sat down, and we just spoke for about, it must have been about 2 to 3 hours, and we just went on, and it was so natural. And I'd never spoken to this guy before. You know, he was someone that wasn't on my radar, and we just connected. And he said, "You know what? I had a dream about you, that you became Muslim." And he said, "I didn't want to say this to you." And I thought, oh, you know, he's just messing around. But you know, he never, not once did he try to sort of proselytize, I guess. He just wanted to know about me, and you know, and sort of get to know a bit more about myself. And obviously I had some questions and so on. And so so this whole situation coincided with me reading this Sira, this biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And I remember getting halfway into the book, and I spoke to Nishan. I called him up, and I said, "Nishan," the guy who I'd been speaking to for 3 hours, I said, I'm convinced." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm convinced." And he said, "What?" And I said, "I've been reading this book." And I said, "Every single thing this man stands for, I believe him." And it's funny, Sabor, because you know my background, but obviously my dad passed away, and I was always someone that always gravitated towards male figures. So whether it was my, you know, stepdads potentially, or, you know, teachers I had in my life, or lecturers, or sort of elder people in my local area, sort of adult male figures I always gravitated towards, because I guess I was always searching for a role model. And it was so funny because I never realized that the person that was the role model that I was looking for was in the book that I was reading. And it was like, subhanAllah, I'd finally found someone who I could really trust in and invest my time in. Because, you know, humans, we always let people down. We elevate the status of people around us, and invariably we're always let down. And so that took me to the point of being convinced. I mean, I can go on in terms of what happened after that, Sabor, about the about going to the mosque for the first time and so on.
I mean, what you just said right now was so profound that, you know, it was like compensation. You're always looking for a fatherly figure.
Yeah.
Destined that would be the Prophet, right? It also kind of reminds me of a lot of people who come to Islam. If you look at this story, and you look at the story in Sura Taha, where Musa alayhi salam, his life seems very chaotic, right? So he commits a mistake by attacking somebody, and that person dies. Then he's fugitive, he runs away, he gets married, and then Allah, and Allah says, I produced you for myself. Meaning, life, it was for this moment. You know? So it kind of reminds me of your story.
SubhanAllah, yeah, it's so true. It's so true. So,
so I want to press you on this point. That sister proactively was trying to convey Islam to you, right?
Yeah.
She didn't judge you for making an innocent mistake of assuming she was a prophet, because I think we don't give non-Muslims benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
That's what we would expect them to do. It's not because they're bad, it's just they don't know.
Of course.
And her persistence is something which I think we should highlight, that is the attitude that we should have.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I think that, you know, it's really important, and we know through giving dawah. So for those who don't know, you know, dawah is when you talk to people, you have conversations about Islam, and you try to sort of break down misconceptions and deliver the message in a way that is most easy to understand, I would say. And yeah, you're totally right, Sabor. You know, I just think back to a guy called Terry, who took Shahada with myself. You remember Terry? And he took Shahada, so he became Muslim outside Stratford train station.
Right, yeah.
And, you know, he was a West Ham hooligan.
Oh, yes, yes, I remember.
And so I remember him coming out the station, and he was dressed in the whole sort of football hooligan gear. And I remember going up to him and saying to him, would you like to talk about Islam? Would you like to learn about the purpose of life? And it was funny because he stopped and he talked, and he actually said to me, Salam alaikum. And I mean, if you saw this guy, you would never in a million years think that, you know, he had a remotely any idea about Islam at all.
Yeah.
And you know, he said some things that obviously, you know, it's a misconception, and you can't, with the way sort of Islam is sort of endorsed, I guess, around the world, and how it's portrayed in the media. You can't blame people, you know, for having a sort of negative perception or having a certain sort of idea about what Islam is or what it isn't. And I remember Terry, actually, after taking Shahada, he worked at a pub, and he was DJing at a pub. And he said to me, literally moments after taking Shahada, he was like, I've got to go. I've got my set at a pub in 10 minutes. So subhanAllah, you know, everyone's got their own journey, and everyone has their own backgrounds, and you know, it's important to sort of embrace that and know that Islam is something that doesn't sort of take from your good qualities. It's something that enhances it. And so that's what I like to do. I remember another story that sort of comes to mind. In Wimbledon, I actually spoke to an EDL member, and I remember him saying to me, "Oh, you Muslims, you're all the same, and you're extreme, and you're terrorists, and all this." And I said, "Look, please, 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 come and talk to me." I said, "Let's have a conversation." And eventually, I managed to convince him to have a conversation with me. And it was what started to develop, Sabor, was a really beautiful conversation. And what I started to sort of unpack from him was the fact that his granddad owned a pub. He was a landlord of a pub, and this lad that I was speaking to, this young man, he was brought up with his granddad, and so he was raised in the pub. And his granddad passed away, and what happened, sort of a long story short, his granddad lost the pub, and the family lost the pub, and it was actually bought and turned into a mosque. So what started to sort of manifest itself is that his sort of hatred and enmity towards Islam was based on an emotional experience that he had resonated with. And you know what, Sabor, you know, we talk about this all the time, but what I did after that, I just said to him, do you know what? I totally understand how you're feeling. I said, because I probably would feel the same way. And I said, you know what? I've got a grandma that I love dearly, and I'm sure, you know, if something like that happened, I would be sort of, you know, devastated. And we connected on such a level. And after that, you know, he was more receptive to listen.
Yeah.
And as a result, we had a lovely conversation, and we shook hands, and so on. So I think you're totally right. You know, it's really important to sort of not judge people, and sort of use whatever they have in a positive light, you know, and try to sort of have a conversation where you can connect with them.
Yeah. And you know, one thing which I love about the way that you give dawah is that you always have this empathy. And I think born Muslims cannot have that. Even if we try, it's very difficult for us not to be judgmental. Because our guard's already up, and we're always sort of thinking, oh, Islamophobia, EDL, this. But if you come from a non-Muslim background, and I've seen yourself, I've seen John Fontaine, I've seen other du'at, they don't have that complex. And they're much more likely to just be completely perspectiveless and just look at the situation and read it for what it is.
Yeah, no, for sure. Listen, you know, no one's perfect at all, and I've made plenty of mistakes. But, you know, I think that what you said is, you know, with myself, Sabor, I always have to remind myself of where I've come from. And, you know, it's difficult because you can't not know what you know. Do you understand? It's once you know it, it's like almost like the Matrix. You know, once you take this pill, you can't go back again. And so I can't sort of unknow what I know, but I can take myself back to a place where I had no clue about Islam, and think to the type of person I was and what would have connected with myself. And I was always quite headstrong as well. So someone that didn't take the time, I guess, to sort of get to know me, and to build that trust. You know, we talk about the emotional bank account. So, you know, taking the time to really invest in that person, for me, then my guard would go up. And I think that, you know, especially when you're giving dawah, it's important to build that relationship first. And we know that that's prophetic as well. We know that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, you know, before he received revelation and before he started to call people to Islam, there was so much wisdom in the fact that he built such a relationship, and people knew him as the trustworthy and the truthful, and that there was real sort of wisdom in that. And I feel that that's definitely the approach that all Muslims should take when they're trying to talk to people about Islam.
Definitely. I totally agree with that. And something else I just wanted to add is, if you look at your story, not only is it the case of Muslims being proactive and actually, you know, trying to help you, but when you have questions, then Muslims actually having the patience and the time to actually articulate the answers. I remember when I first met you, and we were just talking, one of the issues that you mentioned was predestination was a very big problem for you. And that Hamza, during the course, he answered your question in a way that helped you. And he didn't judge you. He didn't say, are you stupid or something? You know, he was trying to help you. And a lot of us, we don't have that patience. And it's probably because Hamza was a revert. He had that, you know, that you're not challenging Islam. You're just trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's really true. And I think Hamza is, you know, he's definitely someone that that I look up to in terms of his approach to dawah. And even yourself, Sabor, you've been very sort of understated, but you're very empathetic yourself. If I might add that, and you've got a lot of patience as well. I mean, to be honest, I think that what's really important is having the mindset that even though I don't understand something at the moment, I trust that what I'm following is the truth, and that eventually truth will come to me. If we believe that Allah's sincerely guided us, and we're trying our best to try to be on what we call the straight path, that it will come to you. And I remember having a conversation at Speaker's Corner actually, and someone said some real sort of hard hitting things to me, and it didn't make sense at the time. And I remember going back and then researching it and so on, and you always invariably find the answer if you're sincere. And I think sincerity is such a big part of it. And so, yeah, it's really important.
Okay, so what I wanted to do now is just sort of summarize, obviously, where we are so far for anybody that's just joined us. So Sean actually accepted Islam. He told us his story, the importance of manners, the importance of conveying the call, and of course of being sincere. Now I want to take the questions from the audience. I'm having a bit of a problem with the echo on my side, so I'm going to try and talk less. Firstly, could you just read out this comment?
Is it the one by Huzaifa?
Yeah.
So, Mr. Dennis, I was a student when you were teaching at Langdon! ! Remember when you told us this story in Jummah Salam? Yes.
Yeah, so it looks like one of your old students has joined us as well.
Yes. So Huzaifa, assalamu alaikum. I hope you're well. It's funny, Sabor, because when I became Muslim, it was one of the most beautiful things, because I went from becoming a teacher to a brother, and which was a real sort of paradigm shift, because I had this deep connection with these young people that I was teaching now, and they would tell me that they would sit next to me in the canteen and say, "Mr. Sean, you're eating with the left hand. It should be the right hand." I was like, "Listen, I'll get there in the end. Don't worry, I'll get there in the end." And but you know what? Bless them. They were wonderful, and I've got amazing memories of all of the students that I taught, and I've had a wonderful relationship with them. And I think that's probably what supported my career as well, is through being able to build positive relationships, and that sort of served me quite well over the years.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think relationships is a big part of it. And being a teacher is probably one of the best ways of giving dawah, through your everyday interaction. So this is the next question. I'm not sure if it's a joke or if it's not, but I thought let's see if you can address it.
Okay, I can't grow a beard. Can I convert to Islam? The answer is yes. I feel like I'm doing a Mufti Q&A now, but I think I can answer that question without any difference of opinion. Yeah, you can convert to Islam if you can't grow a beard. I would say that forget the aesthetics of being a Muslim and focus on the most important thing, which is just a belief, and trying to foster a relationship with your maker, and that's the most important thing. And I remember what Sabor once used to say. Well, what he used to say, and I never forget this, and I always picked it up, is when you become Muslim, imagine like in the gym, that you don't pick up the heaviest weight first. You always pick up the smallest weight, and you build up slowly. So having a beard is definitely not a prerequisite, and it's not something that you have to do. It's just something that is it's a sunnah, which means that it's something that the Prophet did, or something that he endorsed, and as a result we try to do it because we want to sort of emulate the Prophets as much as possible, but it's definitely not a prerequisite.
Excellent. Jazakallah khair. And another question from Sister Fahima.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum, Sister Fahima. Did you feel overwhelmed with the amount you needed to understand about being a Muslim? There must have been a lot which frustrated you. What did you struggle with the most when you converted? Okay, really, really good question. A loaded question. So let me try and tackle it one at a time. So in terms of being overwhelmed with information, yes, I think that can be the case. However, what's really, really important is that you have good people around you. And I was quite fortunate. Quite soon after becoming Muslim, I actually got married quite soon after. And so I had quite a solid infrastructure with Muslims around me that could ground me. And quite soon after also, I attached myself with Ira, who Sabor has represented for some time. And that really, really helped me, because obviously these were experienced individuals that could give me a sense of perspective and also manage my expectations as well. And so having gone on the new Muslim course, which I'm now going to endorse because you're asking me, that is something that I would definitely encourage to go to some type of retreat or course or something where you can really establish the fundamentals, and that will really, really help you. There must have been a lot which frustrated you. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be completely honest with you now, and I know that there's probably family and friends watching this. So one of the biggest things when you become Muslim is you're trying to reconcile between the old you and the new you. And that's probably the biggest thing that is challenging, and something that you really need to take good care of. You know, when you're sort of besotted about someone, or you're infatuated and you want to tell everyone, and you end up boring everyone because you want to talk about it so much, and everyone else isn't as keen as you are. That's not a good approach to have. What I would say is what I found really, really interesting or really beneficial is trying just to be the best person you can be, in terms of a son, in terms of a brother, in terms of a friend, grandson, nephew, cousin, whatever the case may be, colleague, and that's the best thing. I guess in terms of what I struggled with the most, I would probably say music was probably a big thing. As I said before, I was heavily involved in music, and it was a big part of my life. And at the time when I first became Muslim, I used to listen to music as well. And I remember listening to a talk where the speaker said that a servant cannot serve two masters. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, let's be real here. How much Quran do I know? And how many verses from songs can I remember? And, you know, off the top of my head, I could have recited albums of Eminem and Jay-Z and 50 Cent and all of these individuals. And I really wanted to get closer to the Quran and get closer to my faith. So I had to make a conscious decision that one had to go, and I wasn't prepared to give up Islam. So as a result, I ended up going completely cold turkey. And that's one of the biggest things that I would recommend to anyone if they're struggling with something, is to try to remove the thing that brings you closer to that thing. Not the thing itself, but the vehicles that bring you to that thing. So, for example, I ended up deleting all of my songs on my iTunes account. I ended up closing down my iTunes account. I ended up getting rid of the CDs from my car. And, you know, slowly but surely, it just became the norm for me. And that's probably something that I struggled with at the beginning, but I found easier as time went on.
Excellent. I just want to ask you a question of something that I dealt with personally, but I found, I mean, I didn't really have a proper answer for it, but I thought maybe you can give your sort of 2 cents on this. Somebody contacted me from Brazil.
Yeah.
They live in a village. They converted to Islam by finding out about Islam online. They've never met a Muslim before, and they are probably not going to meet a Muslim for years now. They're just in some remote village in Brazil. So your way of giving support to new Muslims was very much based on social support, which is needed. What would you advise with a situation like the one I dealt with? What would you advise to that person?
In terms of financial support, or
no, as in they want to maintain their iman. They also say they're struggling with their old lifestyle, their new lifestyle, all of this, but they're not going to meet Muslims because they're just stuck in a remote place where there's no Muslims. How do they maintain their iman? I think we've lost.
Sorry, I think it cut out. Yeah, we think we're back. Yeah. We're now in a time where information is in abundance, and we're not short of information. I think what we're short of now is quality information and factual information. But in terms of information itself, we're very blessed to be in a time where you can access Islamic knowledge. You can access lectures. One thing that I would probably recommend is to go onto some type of course where there's a sense of accountability and some type of consistency in having to learn something. So, for example, there are various online universities which offer free subsidized courses for those in more financial difficulty, but that could be anywhere in the world, and from that gives you an opportunity to be able to study certain Islamic sciences, but to do it in a way that is consistent. And I think that with that, you're also exposed to a community as well. So you've got other individuals that are studying. So you have forums as well that you can engage in. You have video forums as well, so you can actually put a face as well to it, and it really helps to make you feel a part of the ummah, of the family of Muslims. So I would say to try to join an online course would be really, really beneficial.
Definitely, that's something that's something that we have access to that previously people didn't. And online communities, they're not as good as offline communities, but they still are available. If you go to Pal Talk, if you go to Facebook, you'll always find these sort of support groups. Now, Muhammad Habib is asking a question here.
Yeah. Which is one ayah in the Quran which stands out to you, an ayah which made you melt? I would say there's a few ayahs that really resonate with me. The thing that resonates with me the most is I would say Sura Al-Fatiha. And the reason why I say that is because it encompasses all of the Quran in the surah, and it's something that when you study it at great length, it's so beautiful in the words that we say when we talk about guide us to the straight path, not the path of those whom have earned your anger, but the ones that have been led astray. So you're really having conviction in what you're saying. I would probably say, in terms of the one that has the most emotional effect on me, is probably Surah Ar-Rahman, where Allah talks about which of the favors do you deny? Because when you recite that, and especially during Tarawih as well, which is during Ramadan, over and over again, Allah is reminding us about all of these favors that He's bestowed upon us. And when you hear all of the favors, and we know that we wouldn't be able to count them, it just makes you truly humble in terms of being a slave to God and having a sense of servitude. So I would probably say Surah Al-Rahman for me.
Excellent. Could you also add something which I wanted to cover before, but we just didn't get to, and we got to the questions, which is, why would you recommend everybody that's online right now and listening and will listen to this afterwards to make dawah a key part of their life? Why is that important for Muslims to do?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that every single person, every single action that we see around us is calling us to something. Now, it might be implicit or it might be explicit. So it might be obvious or it might be a bit more subtle. But everything we do is calling us to something, whether it may be materialism, it could be another sort of belief, it could be another ideology, it could be another culture or worldview, perhaps. And so by giving dawah, what you're doing is you're reversing that move. So you're actually pushing into the other direction, and not in a way that is aggressive, but in a way that is sort of affirming what you believe. So for that, it gives you confidence and conviction in your own belief. through giving dawah. But ultimately, I feel that, on the day of judgment, we see people around us. We see people that work in post offices. We see people that work in news agents, in shops. We see people on buses. We see people on trains. We see people at work. We see our neighbours that we interact with every day. And for me, knowing that these people don't know about Islam, that's the thing that upsets me the most. And that's something that I feel that we've got an obligation to convey the message as much as possible and in as much wisdom as possible. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a street dawah conversation where you go up to someone and you talk to them. It could be in many different ways. But I feel that in terms of that should always be at the thought process of our mind, that we should try outwardly to convey Islam in whatever means we can and in whatever way we can. And I go back to the story of at the beginning, when I was on the way to the mosque. When I was coming back from the mosque, I do apologize. I just became Muslim, and I remember being sat on the train, and it was a Friday night, and I was sat on the train, and I was surrounded by lots of people, sort of dressed up to go out to the parties and to the clubs and so on. And a lot of them were drinking, and a lot of them were sort of intoxicated and so on. And that was me. I was a nightclub promoter 2 weeks prior to that conversion. And I looked at everyone and I wanted to cry, because at that moment I thought to myself, subhanallah, these people don't know the reason why they exist. And it really upset me that, we go about our life and we don't ever question it. Very rarely do we question it. Normally, and Allah tells us in the Quran, it's at a time when we have a calamity in our life, we sort of stop and pause for a minute and we question. But normally people don't. And for me, I have that sense of sort of obligation to talk to people about Islam. And I think every single one of us that are Muslim, we know non-Muslims around us that we interact with on a day-to-day. And I feel that, what greater gift can you give to someone than to deliver the message of Islam? And I heard a sheikh said one time that, if you had a treasure, would you not want to share it with people? And we have to look at Islam as the most beautiful of treasures that we want to share with people. So we shouldn't want to hide it away, because if you had something that's beautiful, you'd want to show it. You'd want to show it off. And so, we have to look at Islam like that, and it's a solution. And so we want to provide solutions to problems.
Excellent. And I think that's the key missing part, which reverts have more access to and born Muslims don't, is how to see the world through their paradigm. So, for example, if a Muslim is going out clubbing, drinking, doing whatever, they still have something to fall back on eventually. Not saying it's a good thing, but with non-Muslims, and it's our duty to actually share the message with them. Now, Sister Iman has a question.
Okay, so Salaam alaikum, Iman. Faith is coupled with belief in the form of knowledge, also known as Aqidah. Did you find it hard believing certain things in Islam? You mentioned that it was after reading about our beliefs that you converted. Did you need any rational arguments, or did it just resonate with your heart? Okay, really good question, Iman. To be honest, I've never been one that necessarily needed logic in terms of my belief in my belief in Islam as such. Reading about the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and reading about what his message was, it made sense to me. So I didn't necessarily hear any sort of philosophical arguments and so on before converting. But what that did as a result, it actually strengthened my faith afterwards. It was something that I thought it gave me conviction in my belief. So what I would say is that it made sense to me beforehand that there was a God, because when we observed around the world around us, We don't see things coming from nothing. It makes sense that there's a creator. You know, the example of seeing footsteps in the sand, you would know that someone has laid them. And you know, when we see the world around us, there must be someone who couldn't have come from nothing. And that was something that I always believed in anyway. But having sort of studied the logical arguments from Islam, that only strengthened my belief. Also known as Akida, did you find it hard believing certain things in Islam? Okay, so you mentioned it was after reading about our beliefs that you converted. Did I find it hard believing certain things in Islam? Let me think. I'm going to write it down. At the moment, there's nothing that comes to mind. However, if something comes up, I will try and say before the end of this stream.
Yeah, and just to add to that, something which we teach in our Dawah training course is anything that comes from Islam which doesn't make sense, you have to go back to where is it coming from and establish if the source is Allah, then it doesn't really matter. So we always, you know, that's the way I think.
No, it's a really, really good point. And I think that was one of the things that that probably for me, it made Islam stand out from any other faith. Because as a result, you know, you do start to look into other religions and beliefs and start to question it. And for me, the authenticity of the Quran was the biggest thing for me. And so knowing how the Quran was preserved and the science that went behind that, it was so rigorous. I mean, you can only believe it. In terms of the information that the Quran had in it, for me, I had to really ask myself the question, how could someone in the desert 1400 years ago have known this information? And for me, I asked that question and I couldn't, I mean, an Irish lady once told me it's better to be hurt by the truth than comforted by falsehood. And wow. I remember, yeah, very profound, right? And I met this lady once a long time ago, and that always stuck with me. And for me, with Islam, you know, I would say the things that she talked about, what was difficult, there was a few things that were difficult that spring to mind. I would probably say the biggest thing that was difficult was probably just trying to be the best Muslim I can and sort of ensuring that I could achieve everything that was sort of asked from me in terms of praying and so on and fasting. And I would say Tarawih was probably a hard thing for me. I remember, for those who don't know what Tarawih is, during Ramadan we try to finish the Quran every evening. We finish 1/30 of the Quran. So by the 30th evening we try to complete the Quran, and you do this while standing and praying. So for me, I remember praying Tarawih, and there was 20 cycles of the prayer, so 20 rak'ah, which is what we call them. And I remember getting to 8 and my knees were shaking, and I remember was there with my nephews and my brother-in-law. And I remember saying to him, I was like, "Are we going now?" He got to 8 rak'ah, and I was like, "Are we going now?" And he was like, "Nope, we're staying." And I was like, okay. I would see people leave. And then it got to 12 and I saw people leave again. I said, "Are we going now?" And he said, "No, we're staying." And I was, gosh, I don't know if I can hack this. And so that was probably one of the hardest things, even though it's funny. But yeah, that was very difficult.
Yeah, definitely. And it reminds me of something beautiful that scholars say, and it's just a part and parcel of Islamic teaching, that it's better to do small deeds consistently than do large deeds and not keep them consistent, because Allah loves the small and consistent. So 5 minutes of adhkar a day, which is deep, is better than adhkar for 50 hours, right?
Yes.
And we always have to keep that in mind. Okay, Sister Fahima has another question.
Okay, so how can we compete? Sorry, Assalamu alaikum, Fahima. I hope you're well. How can we compete with propaganda when it comes to dawah? As some of us are still ourselves, learning Islam all over again. Okay, so okay, that's fine. So I think what you're talking about, Fahima, is I guess difficult conversations, perhaps when you're trying to give dawah. So people's sort of negative perceptions, and actually, this is really, really important. So a lot of people say, you know, how can Islam be the truth? It's barbaric. And how can Islam be the truth because you subjugate women? And how can Islam be the truth because and you know, you can complete the sentences. And I think that what's really, really important for us to do is to not answer those questions, but to instead take that particular sort of perception and divert the conversation into the question, is Islam the truth? And then what you do is you go into the fact that, is there a God? And if there is a God, did he reveal himself to mankind? Did he send revelation, or did he just leave us to sort of work it out and get on with it and sort of come to some type of conclusion? And I think what you'll find is 99.9% of people will actually say that, yeah, that makes sense. That if there is a creator, he would have revealed, you know, the purpose of why he created us. And so what you try to do is regardless of what people believe about Islam, you say, do you know what? I take that on board. However, you know, do you believe in God? And I think take it from that route. And then from there, then ask them, do you believe that he would reveal himself to mankind, or to reveal the purpose of our life? And then you can talk about the Quran and go from there. And from there, you have a beautiful conversation where you can start to explore further. And what you'll find is through that conversation, what they said at the beginning, they'll probably forget about, because you would have taken them, you know, into somewhere a lot deeper than they would have wanted to go at the beginning.
Definitely. And it's always about rerouting back to the source, you know. Just today I was giving some advice about dawah, and I said, if the dawah that you're doing does not involve reconnecting people back to God, then it's not dawah. It's just, yeah, that's the main point.
It's so true. So true.
This brother has a question about, what's his name? Tazrian?
Tazrian? Assalamu alaikum, Tazrian. How much do reverts struggle to learn the basics of fiqh, and what would you advise them so that they remain steadfast? Okay, so thank you for your question. Really good question. I would say that the most important thing is that you study. That's really important. So if you can find some type of course of study that's, as I said before, that's consistent, that is authentic. So, you know, do your sort of background research in terms of who you're studying with. But if generally, if it's even in your local mosque, perhaps they've got classes on. But the best thing is just to learn and to study and to develop. In terms of the basics of fiqh, again, you'll learn that. So you'll learn Sharia, you'll learn about fiqh. And as time goes on, you'll start to develop your own understanding as to what fiqh is, and so on. And obviously, we know that there's many different matters, but generally, what I would say is as Sabor said, to start small and to build up slowly. So start by learning your religion, learning about Aqeedah is probably the most important thing at the beginning, about who Allah is, what Allah's names and attributes. And starting to build from there. After that, you can start to go into other Islamic sciences, fiqh being one of them, and you can start to study the different madahib, and then come to sort of a conclusion about sort of reconciling between them, and start to develop your own sort of your pathway. I would say.
Definitely good advice, and just like to add to that. Keep away from any sort of sectarianism. Yes. People infighting. It's the best way of giving up, right?
Yeah.
It's the best way of getting a new Muslim demotivated, right? Islam's very simple. We have difference of opinions in certain things about jurisprudence and whatnot. As long as you're following the Islam that we understand as the majority of Muslims, don't get involved in these types of issues. There's a really good question from Ruhu.
Okay. What advice? Salam alaikum, Ruhul. Hope you're well. He's a good friend of mine as well. So, what advice would you give non-Muslims who may be interested in finding out more about Islam, and where do they start? Um, what advice would you give non-Muslims who may be interested in finding out about Islam? Okay, really, really good question. I would say that first of all, in terms of advice, the first thing is about being sincere. We talked about sincerity before, but if you're sincere in terms of your wanting to learn about Islam, then that will take you down the right path, because we tend to sort of find what we're looking for, if that makes sense. So definitely be sincere in the first instance. Second of all, what I would say is if you want to find out about Islam, I would say IER is probably the best place. So there's a website called onereason.org, where you can learn about Islam, and it teaches you about the basics of Islam. And you can speak to people around you. If you've not got sort of immediate access, or you're someone that's not sort of exposed to a lot of the Islamic sort of materials out there, ask a colleague. Muslims tend to be very forthcoming when it comes to stuff like this. Go to your local mosque. I would say that we tend to, as non-Muslims, there's this perception that the mosque is somewhere quite daunting, and somewhere that's perhaps quite dangerous and so on. It's really not that. So definitely go down to your local mosque and just ask someone. People tend to be very forthcoming when it comes to helping out people with regards to learning about Islam. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head with sincerity first, because somebody asked Abdurrahim Green, our CEO, what's the one argument that will absolutely rationally prove Islam is true? And he said there's no such thing. Anybody that's sincere, Allah will guide. Anybody that's not sincere, all the rational arguments in the world will have no impact on them, like literally zero impact. So we've run out of time. As you guys know, we do this for 1 hour, and we don't try and go overtime just to keep it consistent every day. So Sean, for everybody watching, what's your advice about how to convey Islam? Why is it important to convey Islam? And what they can learn from your journey that they can apply in the da'wah?
Yeah, I would say that in terms of the importance of conveying Islam, just think, there's a few things here. First of all, the reward that you get. That it's like a multiplying effect. So you hear about these sort of multiplying money schemes, where you tell one person and then they tell, and you earn money through this thing. Well, imagine the amount of reward that you get through conveying Islam, and someone taking shahada through your words that you've used. So Allah's guided them through your words. Now, as a result of that, the reward will be plenitude, because every time they pray, every time they do dhikr, every time they give zakat, every time they fast, you'll be getting the reward for that. Not only that, every single time their children that grow up as Muslims, you'll be getting reward from that, and the reward will continue. So first of all, think about the benefit on the Day of Judgment. We want to have the book in our right hand, and we want to have lots of good deeds in there. So that's something that's definitely a huge influence in terms of incentives for giving dawah. The second of all is just having compassion for the people around us, having compassion for people that don't know the purpose of their life, that are living a life where they don't realize why they exist, and they're just living day to day. There's a lot of people in this world. We've got people that are living off food banks in the UK. We've got people that are high flying, that sort of, seemingly have it all, but actually they're depressed. And we know that anxiety and depression is one of the biggest killers in this world at the moment. And I truly, truly believe that the reason why depression and anxiety and stress and so on is so prevalent is because people don't know the purpose of their life. And we've got the answer to all of their problems in Islam. So just from a compassion perspective, that's the biggest thing. And in terms of from my journey, what I feel that people can take from it is just trying to be sincere, trying to have as close a relationship with Allah as you can. So we know the story of Ibrahim. He was the best friend of Allah. So try to really be the best friend of Allah as much as possible. So to try to constantly remember Allah as much as you can, and try to have a real relationship with Allah and talk to Allah. You know, pray tahajjud. I can't stress how much the power of praying in the last third of the night. It's a powerful thing. That's one of the biggest things. And don't ever let go of the Quran. You know, make sure that you keep your relationship with the Quran, and try to be the best you can be in your field. Whether you're a teacher, whether you're a road sweeper, whether you're a CEO of a company, whether you're a cab driver, whether you work in a grocery store, have what we call ihsan in your going about your daily affairs. So to try to do things with excellence and try to have the best of characters. And that will be the thing where people will gravitate towards you. And as we talked about before, naturally people will become inquisitive through your behavior and through your actions. And that will be a nice, as we say, fertile ground to then deliver the message of Islam, because it's not coming on a cold plate, it's coming nice and warm and served on a beautiful platter. So yeah, so just to try to be the best person you can be and be excellent in whatever field you're doing.
Absolutely spot on advice. You know, we sometimes think a doctor's worth more than a cleaner, but the reality is whatever role Allah's created for you, do the best you can. And ultimately, it's your relationship with Allah that makes you valuable in the cosmos, not anything else.
No, just on that. Sorry, I do apologize. Try to be different to everyone around you as well. So people think that Islam is something not like anything else. So like what you just said before, if you think outside the box and do things that will trigger people that will say, hold on a second, no one's ever done that before. So whether it's a complete random act of kindness, whether it's, you know, don't ever be shy and really think outside the box where you can really shock people of how beautiful what you believe in is, and let it manifest.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jazakallah khair, Sean, for joining us on YouTube Live. We'll definitely have you again after a few weeks. Since we're all under lockdown, it's very difficult to not be online. So while we're online, we might as well spread the love, spread Islam, and share the wisdom that Allah has blessed you with. So Jazakallah khair, and we'll see you soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.